Welcome to the Lessons from Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Brian Beckham. Well, season 1 is a wrap, and I got to tell you, recording this podcast with 40 of some of the best leaders in the country has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. I have learned so much over the course of the past 12 months about leadership in general and positive leadership specifically. In fact, it's clear to me after interviewing people from all different kinds of businesses and sports and the military and best-selling authors, psychologists, investors, CEOs, you name it. It's clear to me that there are fundamental principles of leadership. And if you pay attention, you will see that people say the same thing. So in any event, a few months ago, I was asked by a United States Air Force colonel who I've known for almost 30 years, Colonel Daniel Urasek, to give a speech on leadership to a bunch of Air Force enlisted men and women and Air Force officers as part of a 2-day leadership conference that Colonel Urasek was putting on. What a great honor it was. And we recorded the speech. And basically the speech talks about what I've learned the last year about good leadership. Like what are the fundamental principles of good leadership I've learned. And so this speech is the first time I've given it, but it really summarizes what I think the 5 fundamental principles of good leadership are. 5 fundamental principles plus a 6th bonus principle. So the speech was recorded, and we did the best job we could with the audio quality. I hope it's good enough for you. So in any event, the last episode of season 1 of Lessons from Leaders is my speech to the men and women of the United States Air Force.
Morning. How's everybody doing this morning? First thing I want to do is I want to thank Colonel Urasek for inviting me to speak here. I've known Colonel Urasek for how long?
Long time.
29 years? Yeah, longer than I care to admit. But, I've known him for almost 30 years, and when I first met him, I thought he was a top-tier leader. I've always thought that, so thank you, Colonel Urasek, for having me here. But I got a bone to pick with you. You know I'm a lawyer, right? You know lawyers don't get up before 0900, right? Especially on a Friday. But I think I first met Colonel Urasek when I was in the Corps of Cadets. And the way the Corps is designed, there's 4 major units. There's the Air Force, there's the Marines/Army, there's the Band, and the Navy. And my senior year, I was the wing commander of the Corps of Cadets, which means I was in charge of all the Air Force guys and girls. And I got to, as part of that, we had, what did we have, 8 Air Force squadrons, I think, at the time? Yeah. And I got to pick, we had 2 staffs or 2 lower level staffs, and then we had the wing, the commander that I was in charge of, and then I got to pick 4 juniors to be on my staff. And what I tried to do is I tried to pick the best 4 juniors, the sharpest, the ones that I thought would be the best leaders. And Colonel Urasek was on my staff, despite not having the best grades at the time. Yep. But I outranked Colonel Urasek, and 30 years later, I look back at that and I laugh. And when we were seniors, we were supposed to go to morning formation at 6:30. And like I said, I'm not a morning person. So I used to send Colonel Urasek to formation on my behalf quite a bit. And I think he's doing this to get me back. So what goes around comes around. But for a very brief period of time, I outranked an Air Force colonel. And so I'm going to see if I still have any of that magic left. So let me see if I can do this. By the way, how many of you are old enough to remember the O.J. Simpson trial? Pretty much everybody. Okay. Do we have any JAG officers here? Any lawyers here? No? Okay. Does anybody remember the most memorable line from the O.J. Simpson trial? If it doesn't fit, you must acquit, right? So, as lawyers, we're taught. So what happened there was, they had this bloody glove. O.J. denied it was his, and the prosecutor decided to do a live demonstration in front of the jury. Okay, without having tested it first, right? You're shaking your head like that's crazy. Sir, what's your name? Okay, you're shaking your head like that's crazy, right? Why would you never do that?
Because if you don't know the answer,
You would never do that, right? Ever. And so we're taught as lawyers, never do a live demonstration without testing it first. So the reason I say that is, I don't know whether my head has grown or this hat has shrunk, but I put this on last night, and this is how it fits. I mean, if I move like this. So anyway, but back in the day, I was wearing this stuff. I got my combat boots on too, by the way. And I see you guys are all wearing. Did we still call them BDUs?
No.
OCP.
Okay.
That's a couple iterations ago.
Okay. We used to call them BDUs, a camo battle dress uniform. But anyway, back in the day in 1996, when I wore this hat, I could turn to Staff Sergeant Daniel Urasek and say, "Drop and give me 5." Does it still work?
Not now.
Not now. Anyway, I feel really lucky this morning. And I feel lucky for 2 reasons. First of all, we hear all the time, "Oh, I love the military, I respect the military." People say that all the time, right? And of course I feel that way too. But mine's a little bit more personal than maybe some civilians, and here's why. My father was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, flew 200 combat missions over Vietnam, was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, I think is what it's called, among many other honors. And then he was in intelligence. My grandfather was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, and he was stationed in, I guess it was West Berlin during World War II, but he was also lieutenant colonel. My mother, who died when I was 10, was an Air Force nurse. Her brother was a chief master sergeant. My older brother was a Marine Corps enlisted man. And I was in the Corps of Cadets. Do we have any Aggies here other than Colonel Urasek? I was in the Corps of Cadets, and so I know hundreds of people in the military. So one reason I feel lucky is because I feel like, I grew up on 6 or 7 different Air Force bases. Is Barksdale Air Force Base still around? I was born in Barksdale Air Force Base. My dad was in Strategic Air Command. And so we were at Barksdale, and then we were at Plattsburgh Air Force Base. Is that still around? Far upstate New York. My dad was on the Guam Islands. Matter of fact, my dad didn't see me when I was born for 6 months because he was flying bombing missions over North Vietnam, and we were in New York at the time. He retired out of Carswell, so I moved around a lot. So I have a real personal family association with the military and with the United States Air Force in particular. I mean, I can still hum the verse. How does it go? Off we go into the wild. Is that still the song? Into the wild blue yonder. What's the next verse? Off we go into the wild blue yonder. Yeah, there you go. I'll never forget that song. So anyway, I feel very lucky for that reason, but I also feel lucky for another reason, and that is leadership, and in particular, what I'll call leadership with integrity, or ethical leadership, has been something I've been interested in forever. I studied computer science at Texas A&M and philosophy. And my philosophy degree was focused on ethics, morals, how to make good decisions. And so this subject is something that is really near and dear to my heart. The leadership in general, and ethical or positive leadership specifically. And so when Colonel Urasek asked me to speak, I was like, man, what a great opportunity. And frankly, I can't think of anything more important that our country needs right now than good leadership, positive leadership. Not all this negative nonsense we see on TV. Sometimes I see these politicians talking and I'm like, grow up. You're acting like children. And so this is a really cool topic, and I think it's an incredibly important topic. And I look out at you men and women, and I think, this is what makes me feel good about the country. Seeing you out here. Because you are the leadership of the country. It's not what we see on TV necessarily. It's folks like you. So I feel lucky to be able to talk on this topic. But let me tell you a little bit something about, I think, how I came to speak on this leadership topic. So during quarantine, I was probably, your experience may have been a little bit different because you're essential services or whatever we call it, but lawyers, especially civil lawyers, they shut the courthouses down, no jury trials, nothing to do, in quarantine for 7 or 8 months. Maybe it wasn't that long, 6 months maybe. And I'm sitting around, and I took quarantine very, very seriously. I have 3 kids, my wife. We went nowhere for months, except maybe get something to eat. And I'm sitting around during quarantine, and of course there's nothing to do, so you're on social media, or you're on the internet doing stuff like that. And I just started, all this negative stuff, our politicians fighting each other and stuff, and I started thinking about this. And I was like, man, we need some positivity in the world. Like, somebody needs to get something positive out in the world, like show what positive leadership is like. And so I started a podcast. Like, it's like everybody's got their own podcast, but I started a podcast during quarantine. And go back to the previous slide. And it's called Lessons from Leaders. And in the past year, I have had the extreme good fortune to speak with 40 of some of the best leaders around. Men and women in the US military, certain politicians, sports stars, New York Times bestselling authors, people like that. And it's been, right there. It's been an incredible experience. It's far exceeded my expectations. And having talked to, over the past year, 40 of some of the most amazing leaders you will ever meet, I can tell you, and this I was actually not expecting this. It is absolutely, without question, that there are patterns. I have seen, I've talked to leaders that have never talked to each other before. And they start saying, and they're in it's not just military leaders, it's sports stars and congressmen and engineers and scientists and entrepreneurs. And they're saying the same type of thing. So I think leadership, good leadership, leaves clues. And so what I want to do, if it's okay with everybody, is, let's see, all right. I'm gonna put on a case for you, okay? Like a lawyer would do. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna suggest to you that over the next 30 minutes or so, that there are essentially 5 fundamental principles of leadership, of positive leadership. 5 principles that if you have all of these principles, you will be a good leader. You will be a good positive leader. Now, obviously, the list is not exhaustive. There's all sorts of different things that good leaders do, but I think these principles are fundamental. And here's how I'm going to prove my case to you. Okay? I'm going to call witnesses. And the witnesses that I'm going to call are going to be the people that I interviewed on my podcast. Okay? And at the end of this, I'm a little bit nervous about doing this, but I'm going to ask you if you think I proved my case. Okay? Everybody cool with that? All right. Number one, and by the way, when you're in trial, you'll be sitting there and the judge will be, all right, Mr. Beckham, call your first witness. Okay. May it please the court. My first witness is Dusty Boyd. Okay. Dusty Boyd, hang on, go back. Just a brief bio. Dusty Boyd was a star athlete in high school. He played a little bit of athletics in college. He graduated, he got a law degree. Then he volunteered to go to the Sudan, which is still a disaster. But I mean, it was a disaster at the time. And he volunteered to go there, by the way, right after he had his first child, in order to help them reconstitute their legal system. Then he comes back to Texas, where he's from, small town in Texas, Gatesville. Anybody heard of Gatesville, Texas? Yeah. And runs for district attorney and has been elected twice, the district attorney. He also, and Gatesville is a small town, and I think people, especially people outside of Texas, have this impression of these small southern towns maybe being a little backward sometimes. He started a program on his own that he created on his own called the MAPS program, which is a way to get, and that he started this right in the middle of the George Floyd protest. Remember, everybody, I mean, that case is being tried right now. But remember, there was these massive protests all across the country. And Dusty started this thing in Correll County called the MAPS program, which is basically where they provide minority people in their community an opportunity to sit and evaluate the work of law enforcement. Was this a good arrest? Should we charge this guy at all, or this girl at all? This is one of the most innovative programs in the country coming out of a small southern Texas town. So that's Dusty Boyd. So I'm going to play a short clip from the podcast with Dusty. And when I play these clips, what I want you to do is because I'm going to play, for each principal, I'm going to play multiple clips from different people, okay? And I want you to see if you see the same patterns that I do, okay? So let's play the first clip of Dusty. I'm sure you live in a comfortable life, making a comfortable living. You got a newborn kid, you're married, and all of a sudden you just uproot yourself and go to a place in Africa that is
Mars.
Not a first world country. No. And so there must be something. I'm really interested in this because I asked Colonel Flynn, I asked Officer Calt, I asked Blake, I asked all these officers, like, there really has to be something drawing you to this, like some sort of real passion to uproot your comfortable life and leave your newborn daughter and go to Africa. So what do you think that was, like, fundamentally that really pulled you to this?
Well, I think in one of your earlier podcasts with Blake Sawyer, I think he explained it real well. I think a lot of it is how you were brought up, you know, with your family and the type of programming that you get from your folks on love for country, love for people, love for service.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where it would at least start, is with how I was raised. And then part is being in the Corps of Cadets and just the understanding and appreciation for what service really does mean.
Yeah.
I mean, I love your podcast. I know it's lessons from leaders, but a lot of it is, you know, for this particular podcast, I'd rather prefer lessons from a servant, because that's what I am. I'm a servant. I'm a servant of my folks here in Correll County, and that's exactly what I was when I went to Sudan. So I think a lot of it came from my upbringing and how I was raised, and then just more components were added on and more ideas were added on while I was around those kind of people at A&M in the Corps that really had.
My next witness is US Congressman Will Hurd. Some of you may know Will Hurd, as a matter of fact. Will Hurd was the student body president at Texas A&M. Then he was an undercover CIA officer for 10 years in the Middle East, running confidential, I don't know what they call them, confidential informants, assets. But I mean, he was like what you see on TV. He comes back to the United States and he was elected twice to the United States Congress. And so This is what he has to say about the most important priority of his when he was a CIA case officer.
The way the National Clandestine Service, the folks like me, the guys and gals like me that were to collect intelligence, we are the collectors of last resort. So if you can't get a piece of information the other way, through diplomacy, through signals intelligence, taking something out of the sky, through imagery intelligence, then you go to the CIA, because human intelligence, humans, is the hardest and the most expensive way of collecting intelligence. And part of the job is you have people that are sharing intelligence with you, and it's protecting them. And my number one job is to make sure. A lot of movies get this part wrong. My most important job was to protect the life of the individual that's sharing the information with me, and that individual's family. And a lot of these movies try to act like those relationships are throwaway. No, that is. Yeah. I would literally. I may have had assets that could get a piece of information, but them getting it was going to put them in such harm that it would potentially get them, they'll get identified and killed. And so you protect those folks, and then if you say, okay, there's a unit within a military that has some information that we need, how do you get access to somebody in that unit, right? And so
my next witness, if it pleases the court, is Brigadier General Joe Ramirez. Joe Ramirez grew up in very modest financial circumstances in East Houston. I don't think anybody in his family ever went to college. He saw the Aggie band march in downtown Houston when he was a little kid and decided that's what I'm going to do. Anyway, long and distinguished military career in the Army, and he's currently the Commandant of the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M. I think he's been the Commandant for almost 10 years now. Is that, Colonel, roughly 10 years? Yeah.
I always tell the story that when I got commissioned, my father, who was a retired master sergeant, as he's pinning on my gold bar as a second lieutenant, he told me, he said, son, let me give you one piece of advice that I think will serve you well as you become a leader in our Army. I said, what's that, Dad? He said, take care of your men and your men will take care of you.
Nice.
And that served me well for 31 years in the United States Army, and it's probably one of the biggest things that I talk about when it comes to leadership, and that's take care of your people, and your people will take care of you. And taking care of your people covers a lot of territory.
For sure.
You've got to be able to talk to your people. You've got to be able to understand your people and listen to them. And when I talk about taking care of people, I tell junior leaders, that doesn't mean you coddle them, you treat them differently, you let them off easy. You have to hold them to standard. You have to hold them to the standard, make sure they're doing the job they get paid to do, and they're doing it well. And make sure they understand that they are part of a much bigger organization than just themselves. Yeah. That they are part of a team where everybody on that team is working together to make the organization successful.
Let's skip over this one. By the way, I'm going to skip over this one just for time purposes, but this is R.C. Slocum. Coach Slocum was the winningest football coach in Southwest Conference history. Also grew up poor in the projects. And you know what? Let's go ahead and play this one real quick.
And I think in a lot of our opinions, Coach Slocum is one of the best Aggies of all time, bar none. And Hunter said, yeah, man, I totally agree with that. Just make sure and ask Coach about the quote about your character really, your character is what you're doing when nobody's watching, basically.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's a basic fundamental, and it goes back to my upbringing. If you believe in the concept of that all-seeing eye,
yeah,
that's up there looking down on you. Your mom and dad may not be there, but that eye is always there. and just little simple things, like a lot of time, you'll pull into a parking place. They got all the lines. Well, you see people pulling there, and they just cut across the line, get out of the car there in a hurry.
Yeah.
Well, next guy comes along would like to have a place to park, but you take it up too, the way you park. No one saw you do that.
Yeah.
And I'll get out of the car. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten out and I've looked. I can't leave my car parked like that. It's just not the right thing to do. I go back, start it back up, and put it in where I'm taking only my space.
Yeah.
So I think if you operate under that deal, that whatever you're doing, A guy told me a story, and I think this may be what Hunter's talking about. This story was given to me by someone else. So it's not original to me, but it says like when you're a little kid, you can picture going out to a farm pond, and you pick up a pebble, and you throw it over the far side, and it goes plunk, and little circles start coming out. And then you say, I'm gonna throw it over here. You throw on that side, and plunk, little circles start coming out. So as you continue to do that, it's like you in your life, what's happening. Sooner or later, and we've all watched it, I've watched a bunch of those little circles just keep getting bigger, and then they start overlapping.
Yep.
So after a while, as you go through life, whatever those things are, you are what you are.
Yeah.
And so your reputation, we all have the ability, and we all get to make our reputation. So you may go into the 7-Eleven across the street from A&M there, and some of the guys are there working. You go in there and you can be rude to him. You can be demanding, or how come you don't have this out here, or hurry up, do this, that, or you go in there and treat him like you'd like to be treated.
Yep.
So you throw out a little stone that day. And then you go and the janitors coming through, sweeping up. They all have their lives, they have problems with their kids, they have all the different issues that we all have. And they're coming through there, so you can just be rude or whatever, or you can be kind. And one of the things, I'll tell you a quick story. I was close friends, one of the big things in my life, I was close friends with President George H.W. Bush. So when he and I hit it off, and we were close friends, he took me up to Pine Valley, New Jersey to play golf.
Great course.
Then we got pushed in the country.
Yeah.
So we're sitting at a table, the president, myself, and two other gentlemen, friends of his who came in. We stayed there on property, and we were having breakfast. So we came there, and this little elderly black lady came over to wait on us. And we were talking about our game and who's going to play and everything. He stopped everything he was doing, everything we were talking about. He turned his attention completely to her and said, how are you doing today? And just a pleasant thing, I'm doing good today. She was probably nervous about coming.
Former president of the free world.
Yeah. And so then at some point, as she came back over there, he said, do you have a grandson or someone that would like a golf ball? Oh yeah, I guess. So he takes a golf ball, he had some in his pocket, and autographed it and gave it to her to give to her grandson.
Beautiful.
And so I always thought, here's a guy, the former leader of the free world, sitting there, had his friends and his golf game and all that, a big place. Said, time out. This lady came over, and he made her feel very special that day.
That's. And I could play you 10 more clips of this, but I'm going to suggest that the number one principle of positive leadership is to be a servant. Your job is to serve the people that you lead. And you know what? I'll be honest with you. I think that's our job, not just in the military, not just in the United States Air Force. That's our job as human beings. And it took me a long time to figure that out, because until I was about 40 years old, I thought this whole thing was about what I could do for me. And I started listening to people like R.C. Slocum and others, and it finally occurred to me that your life, the quality of your life, ultimately, will not be judged by what you do for yourself. It'll be judged by what you do for others. So principle number one, leaders are servants. Number two, General Ramirez again.
So a lot changed. So we spent the entire summer literally planning and preparing for the fall. And despite the fact there were some that thought that we would not be able to have Corps of Cadets because of the pandemic, our attitude going in was, don't tell us what we can't do, tell us what we can do.
Yeah.
And so we focused on, okay, we've got a challenge here. How do we overcome this challenge? And I am surrounded by a phenomenal team of leaders, former military, education, you name it. I've got a wide variety of backgrounds that work on my staff and the ROTC staffs. And we all put our minds to figuring out how we were going to do this fall. And we've been able to have a Corps of Cadets. We put in procedures to try to mitigate and reduce the risk of the spread of COVID-19. We worked extremely hard with the School of Public Health, the University Health Center, the Health Science Center, the Residence Life, all these people helped us develop a plan to mitigate and reduce risk among the cadets so we can still have a core and maintain some sense of normalcy throughout the fall semester. And thankfully, that has gone extremely well.
District Attorney Dusty Boyd.
Trust does not come from a vacuum. You have to build
Pause
that.
it for a second. By the way, this is District Attorney Dusty Boyd talking about the MAPS program right after the George Floyd incident and all the protests happened. So that's the context in which Dusty's talking.
Trust does not come from a vacuum. You have to build that. So what you have to do is you have to design a governance that is transparent, that is accountable, and that can communicate, and not just communicate to its people, but also listen to its people and respond to their concerns.
Yeah.
Don't just listen. And I know we're going to talk about this in a little bit with my program called MAPS that I started here in Gatesville. I'm tired of the talk. I'm 45 years old.
Me too.
I have heard
Me too.
about the impacts and the dynamics about racism, and for too long, people, the first response when you go any talking head, I don't care what station you're on, it's, well, we need to talk about this. No, we're done talking. Let's do something.
I don't have a video for this one, but this is Purple Heart recipient Nick Calt. Nick Calt was a United States Naval Academy graduate, became a Marine. During training, he got one hand blown completely off and lost part of his thumb, tips of his finger on his other hand, and then continued. Can you imagine trying to pass the Marine Corps PFT with one hand? Then he goes to Iraq and fights in the Battle of Fallujah and was shot with a 7.85 millimeter round through the gut. Comes back to the United States, long period of recovery. He served his country as a Marine. He's had one hand blown completely off, the other one badly damaged. Then he gets gut shot. And what does he decide to do after he gets out of the Marines? Become a firefighter in California. I mean, like the hardest possible job. And the firefighter jobs in California have rigorous physical standards too. And despite his physical incapacity, went through all of it no problem. And so, go ahead, yeah. I'm going to suggest to you that a good positive leader, principle number 2, is they are problem solvers with a bias for action. I've run a business for 20 years now here in Houston, a law firm. And we have a rule, Carlos works with me, he'll tell you this, that the people that work for me, I have about 15 people that work for me, are not allowed to bring me problems unless they have solutions. Okay? Anybody can tell you the problems. That is not hard at all. The reason you're wearing the uniform you're wearing, the reason the people that work for me, is not to tell me the problems. I mean, obviously you got to know what the problems are, but that's just half of it. The reason you have that uniform on is to solve problems. As a matter of fact, that is the most important thing I think a leader does, to solve problems. All right, let's go to the next one. Number 3, this is a man named Bucky Richardson. Bucky Richardson was a college football phenomenon. Anybody remember Johnny Manziel, Johnny Football? He was Johnny Football before social media, okay? I was actually playing basketball at A&M when he was playing football, so we knew each other a little bit, but he was a superstar. And this is principle number 3.
A lot of people don't know that you were originally from Louisiana, and I think, tell me if I'm remembering this right, when you were trying to decide, you were a very good baseball and very good football player in high school, and you were trying to decide between, I think, LSU and A&M.
Yeah, that's correct.
And I think, tell me if I'm remembering this right, you made your decision, I think right on signing day, about you were pretty close to going to LSU and then made your decision. So am I remembering that right? And if so, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was pretty close to signing day. It wasn't the day. I had grown up in Baton Rouge. I grew up about 15 miles from Tiger Stadium. My dad would take me to LSU games since I could remember. And that was always kind of be cool to be able to play college one day, much less LSU or a place like A&M. Ultimately, when I came on my visit to A&M, we had a great tour of the campus, and this lady that showed us around was just phenomenal and patient, because we had a million questions. And I think after that campus tour, I said, this is where I want to be. And just those kind of decisions, those big decisions that you make, you educate yourself, and then you follow your gut.
Love that.
Next witness, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is active duty Colonel John Gallimore, who some of you may know. Colonel Urasek we've known Colonel Gallimore since he was a freshman, I guess, basically, in the Corps. But he's a Thunderbirds pilot, he's a combat pilot, F-16s, and he's the current group commander at Nellis Air Force Base, at least as of 6 months ago.
So, as much as I love flying jets, the Air Force takes you out of your comfort zone, if you will, out of a fighter squadron, and then they put you in professional military education, which is it's going to get a master's essentially. And then you have to do a staff job at some point. And prior to being back here at Nellis, my staff job is I was the Deputy Executive Officer to the Commander of the United States Central Command, which is one of 6 geographic combatant commands we have around the world. And so he was a 4-star general, and I learned more about myself and about being an officer in the United States military in the 18 months that I served under him than I had in my 18 and a half years of service leading up to that point. It was a phenomenal life experience, but one of his 4 tenets was trust your instincts. So when he would talk to his other commanders, and he's as high as you can get, right?
Yeah.
And when he would talk to his other commanders, he would say exactly that, is trust your instincts, because your instincts are what got you here. And they haven't failed you so far. Now,
anybody know who this is? Vasily Arkhipov? Does anybody? I can't believe you guys don't know who this is. This man, without this man, none of us are here right now. Who was talking? Yes, sir.
Isn't he one of the Russian snipers?
No, but you're close.
He was a air defense officer, Russian military.
Close.
He he told the computers they were wrong when they said that our missiles were launching against us, or against the Soviets.
Yes, essentially yes. This man is known as the man who saved the world. So he was a Russian sub-commander during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And they had, at the time, the Russians had a system where 2 people had to authorize the launch of nuclear weapons. It happened to be that because he was his rank, he was a 3rd guy, they had gotten a false signal, essentially, that we had launched nukes against him. He was supposed to launch nuclear weapons from his sub, but his instinct told him something was wrong, and he decided not to. So principle number 3 is trust your instincts. Every one of you here is here because you have good instincts. There's a security expert named Gavin DeBecker who provides security for Jeff Bezos and all these heads of state and stuff. He wrote a book about self-defense or protecting yourself. And one of the fundamental things he said was, if something doesn't feel right, listen to your gut. Trust your gut. We have evolved as humans over tens of thousands of years to have senses that sometimes we may not really know. We can't put it into words. Something doesn't feel right. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? Good leaders trust their instincts. When I think back on my life, I'm 48 now, I think every time I did something that didn't feel right in my stomach, it was a bad decision. And when I trusted my instincts, almost every single time, it was the right decision. Next witness, Ben Glass, 9 kids, 3 businesses, published 8 books, successful lawyer, also successful entrepreneur. This is one of his books. His book is called Play Left Fullback.
Tell us what's the meaning of the title? Tell us the story behind the title.
So when I was 12 years old and I was a halfway decent soccer player and we were going to my first tryout, my dad says, when you get there, tell the coach and he's going to ask and tell me to play left fullback. And I said to Dad, I said, well, I'll do that, but let me ask you a couple of questions first. I said, you know I'm right-footed? He goes, yeah, I know. He goes, you know I've never played defense? He goes, yeah, I know. I said, you know I like to score goals? He says, yeah, I know. It's all right, so why are we going to tell him to play left fullback? He says, because no one else is going to want to play that position, and you'll at least get on the team, right?
Yeah.
Principle being to show up differently. And he said, and then we'll figure it out.
Blake Sawyer, next witness. Blake Sawyer graduated from Texas A&M. 9/11 happens, joins the United States Marine Corps, fights in the Battle of Fallujah, does 2 combat tours, I think. Colonel Yursek knows Blake. Gets out of the United States Marine Corps, and now he's been a wildly successful entrepreneur. This is what he says about when he joined the Marine Corps. This is how he thought about it.
So let me ask you this, Blake. Did you have to go through officer candidate school? And then when you went through tell people what OCS or...
So I joined through the officer selection office in Phoenix, Arizona, of all places. I researched the offices that had a deficiency in officer recruitment, and Phoenix popped up as the number 1, so I moved to Phoenix and joined there.
Yeah.
And I got in in the Marine Corps you can choose aviation or ground.
Yeah.
The only options. You don't get to choose what your job is. You earn that at TBS or whatever. So he had 1 aviation slot open. I didn't want to be a pilot. I didn't want to be an aviator, but I wanted to get in, and that was my ticket in. So I got in. I went to Quantico, Virginia. You have to go to OCS, which is an officer boot camp. It's about at the time it was 10 weeks. And the first day there, they lined all of the new candidates up on the parade deck, and they said, if you have an aviation contract, step forward. So a lot of people stepped forward. If you have a ground contract, take a step backwards. Everybody step backwards. If you want to switch, go to that side of the parade deck. And so me and 1 other Marine went to the other side of the parade deck, and he happened to want to be aviator. I wanted to be in infantry, and
Next witness, this is Jared Dunn. When Jared Dunn was 20 years old, yeah, about 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to kind of go through this pretty quickly. 5-10 minutes maybe at most. I know you guys have a schedule to keep, but I'll kind of fly through this. Jared Dunn graduated from college when he was 20 years old. He was camping in the Rio Grande, dove into the river, hit his head, has been paralyzed from the neck down since that point. He's become a world famous painter. Paints with his mouth. Go to the next clip. Skip that one. I had Jared on the podcast because I'm running out of time. I'm going to skip that part of it. But after the podcast, I commissioned a painting from Jared. And this is about 5 foot painting. This is hanging in my office. Go to the next one. Go to the next one. Next one. Next one. Next one. Back. Principle number 4, be willing to play left fullback. In other words, do what it takes to get the job done. Okay? Be the best you can be at whatever it is you happen to be doing at the time. And principle number 5, this is Jake Banks. When Jake graduated from college, he became a lawyer. He was a prosecutor in Tarrant County. He lost his first case. Then he won 44 straight cases, criminal cases, his first year. And then he spent the next 2 years in a French prison in solitary confinement for trying to smuggle ecstasy to the United States. Crazy story. Wrote a book about it called Lawyer X. I want you to listen when you hear this clip from Jake, not necessarily about what Jake did, but about what his friend did when he was in prison.
We have a mutual friend who is a very prominent military officer, and I learned recently that he sent you a letter every single week in 2 years when you were in jail. And I'm sure stuff like that helped too, because one of the things that I think you were probably worried about, I would be worried about it in your situation, is are my family and friends going to abandon me because because of what I did? And I'm sure it helped a lot when you realized at some point that you had a family and a group of friends that were not going to abandon you. They were going to stick with you. They weren't going to say, "Hey, Jake, that was really smart. We support your drug dealing," but they were not going to quit on you.
It was straight up tough love. Straight up tough. And I think the lowest point there, I'm looking at a maximum of 10 years in France. The lowest point on there, and the letters that I got from my friends, and it wasn't like everybody. I was surprised, actually. A couple of people were so mad at me. So mad at me. I'm not going to write you because I'm so mad at you for what you did. And I thought, I'm the one sitting over here in jail, not you, goddammit. Yeah. And it took me a while to realize I'm mad at you. I'm mad at you because I love you.
I'm running real short on time, so I'm going to skip over some of these clips. But the point is, the friend of his that wrote him a letter every single week for 2 years saved his life. Because Jake thought about committing suicide multiple times. Okay? And the friend that wrote those letters is a Marine Corps colonel right now. Okay? He didn't abandon his men. He was loyal to them. He didn't say, "You did a good thing. I support what you did." But just like in the military, I'm sure in the Air Force, you never leave anybody behind. Ever. You're loyal to your people. And then I'm going to skip over this, and I have a bonus principle for my personal leadership hero. This is when I think of the best leader I can think of, this is the person that comes to my mind personally, and it's my father.
I'd say the very first thing that people, if you're a leader, the very first thing, in my opinion, is you should keep in mind, and I think I mentioned this to you the other night, is leadership starts with caring, okay?
Yeah.
Leadership starts with caring. That means caring about getting the job done. That means caring about the people that you work with. And that means caring about the community, okay?
Yeah.
And I'm convinced that someone in a leadership position, if they can kind of keep those things in mind, it'll keep them out of trouble.
Yeah.
Okay? But anyway, these are just some things that I picked up. Be nice. Don't be a jerk, okay?
Yeah.
All leaders are nice. And if they're not, it doesn't last very long. And I was in the Strategic Air Command, and the motto was, to err is human, to forgive is not SAC policy, okay?
Yeah.
Commander-in-Chief of SAC, Russell Doherty, basically told all his commanders that he was not going to rate them on being a jerk. And in SAC, they had a lot of people like that. The more they could intimidate you, the better commander they thought. You'd be nice to people. And
Be nice. Be good to your people. You don't have to be a jerk to be a good leader. Matter of fact, you can be mean and lead people, but that never works long term. So anyway, I think those are the 5 plus a bonus fundamental principles of leadership. These are the witnesses and the evidence I have for you. And with that, I guess the judge would be Colonel Urinsek. With that, Your Honor, I rest my case. So what do you think? Did we win or did we lose the case? Let me see by a show of hands, did we win? It's a unanimous verdict.